Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is Al Fadi, and with me here in our virtual studios, our dear brother Dr. J. And today we have a treat for you. This is one of those rare moments where Jay is available. He's always cranking up videos, especially in late night. But today I thought about doing something with him since the two of us, have been talking to many of you about many problems in a traditional narrative of Islam. And there is always new discoveries or new research data out there that sadly not a whole lot of people pay attention to, but we're thankful for our brother, Dr. J, who works with an amazing team like Brother Mel and others to put together some of that data for us to begin to assess and analyze the many holes in the traditional narrative of Islam. And whenever we come across something new, we make an effort to also update you on any new discoveries. So today is no exception, except giving you some updates on the latest and the greatest when it comes to the holes in the narrative and any new discoveries related to that. Of course, I want to thank all of you for being here with us. Thank you to our moderators. And I see some wonderful guests, repeat customers. Vivian, I am drinking my tea in a patriotic cup. So just to let you know, she is definitely competing with me all the time when we're drinking our tea or our coffee. Brother, thank you so much for being here.
Well, listen, Al Fadi, you and I go way back, and I think there's this symbiotic relationship that you and I have where we're both on the same page. We're thinking the same way, and we've been friends for many years. You and I have worked together in the studios. We've been together in your studios. In fact, we were just together last month in your studios, and we will continue to do this. But what I love about coming on your show, Al Fadi, is we have such different personalities, you and I. Maybe you haven't noticed this, but you're very calm and collected. You hardly crack a smile. Your face is very stolid. You're kind of the cerebral, intellectual, academic type that sits behind there, and you're always throwing questions out. And then I come along. I'm anything but cerebral. I'm anything but intellectual. I am the emotive, hammering away. A warrior on the streets, so to speak. I've spent 25 years at Speaker's Corner, where a place where if you didn't yell loud and if you didn't overpower those who were coming at you, hundreds of Muslims at a time, you weren't going to be heard. And so in some ways, we have two completely different personalities. However, what's fascinating is that our personalities complement each other. And everybody has noticed this about us. In fact, almost every time when you bring me on to introduce new material. You bring me on to introduce new ideas, new research. That's why you brought me on tonight. And when we do that, I end up doing most of the talking. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, that's what I was told. But I mean, when people tell me that, I laugh. I'm like, well, he's my guest and I'm asking and he's answering. So what's wrong with that?
Have you noticed you had to actually unmute yourself even to answer that question? You're muted the whole time. I don't ever unmute myself because I'm the one that's coming with the new information. I'm the one that's coming to introduce it. And then I throw questions at you and you respond to it. And what I love about you, you have such a depth of knowledge, such an amazing amount of background that it doesn't matter what I throw at you. I cannot fool you. I've never been able to find any little chink in your armor to try to hang you on it. And so that's why I love working with you, because you do have such a great background. You do have such a great personality, and we do complement each other in our different approaches, the way we communicate.
And I'm thankful for that, brother. Thank you, of course. I mean, I remember the first time I met you in person, I honestly thought like, wow, I mean, this is the real deal right here sitting in my table. And when I asked you even to come to my show, I thought for sure you're going to try to be nice to me and say no. But praise the Lord, that's been working out ever since. And the material you bring, Jay, is extremely important. As you know, I am a former Muslim from Saudi Arabia, and everything you talk about when it comes to that traditional narrative comes from the area where I grew up, where I was passionate about. And now it breaks my heart that my people are fooled by the traditional narrative, and somehow we need to really bring it up to their attention. By the way, Jay, I get a lot of messages behind the scene. People are telling me they're seriously either considering leaving Islam or have left Islam on account of some of this damaging material that we've been sharing.
In fact, it's got to be damaged. And it's fascinating. The area you come from, none of this material comes from. Isn't that fascinating? You have been told this. You have been brought up to believe this. And all Muslims have been brought up to believe that everything that Islam is, how it came about, where it came about, who Muhammad was, what he said, what he did, where he went, where he lived, how he moved from Mecca to Medina, these in 622, everything they know is turning out to be a lie, is turning out to be a lie. And it must, it must, if it shocks you who have grown up with it, how much more is it going to shock those who are listening to us right now? The tens of thousands of Muslims, I mean, you're getting hundreds of thousands of Muslims listening to you on these, specifically these shows on the historicity of Islam and the origins of Islam and the problem with the Quran.
Amen. Amen. So brother, I mean, you can, give people any kind of background behind why this is important. And if you want to update us on any newer discoveries, I mean, you and I were just about a month ago at the studios, and I guarantee you between back then and now, you probably have even newer material now that popped in the scene.
Yeah. In just the last month, we've gone on a whole new tangent, a whole new area. And this is what we're calling the Jerusalem thesis. Now, before anybody gets upset with me, I had nothing to do with this thesis. This is not my research. It's not. So I am nothing more than a communicator. So be careful. Please don't anybody assume that it is my material or that I did the research, or that any of us, those of us who are who I'm representing, should take credit for that. The research that's going on now, and this has just happened the last month, and this is if you go up on Fander Films, that's my YouTube channel. If you go up on Fander Films, it's with the PFANDERFILMS, you can see the last, I want to say maybe about 5 or 6 videos have been on this Jerusalem thesis. I've got a hair right here. I just want to get it out of my face. Yeah, it's this Jerusalem thesis. Well, it is exactly like it sounds. It's this idea, this supposition that almost everything that we're finding out about the Hajj, everything we're finding about different theologies, even the whole premise of the apocalypse, the end times in Islam, many of the practices, many of the beliefs, a good bit of the theology can all be traced back to Jerusalem, and Judaism. Now, most people, and this is what's been fascinating, most people are not surprised by this. And I can see some of those who are watching right now probably are not surprised by this, because it stands to reason that an awful lot of the Quran is borrowed from Judaism. It's borrowed from biblical texts. It's borrowed from biblical characters. We can see 19 of the biblical prophets in the Quran. So that should not surprise us. A good bit of the stories about the prophets are not from the Bible necessarily. In fact, this is one thing you and I have talked about, haven't we, Al-Fadi? That these stories, boy, I don't recognize the stories at all. Do you recognize the stories that we see in the Quran?
No, I mean, and of course, what you mean by that probably is that it does have a resemblance somewhere. There is always an origin to these particular stories, but it has nothing to do with Arabia or Mecca or Medina, if you wish.
Well, the biblical story, the biblical characters that we see in the Quran, but the only thing that they have is the name. That's about the only thing.
That is true. That is true. But these stories are not biblical, per se.
They just make no sense. They're not the stories I grew up with in Sunday school. They're not the stories I read about in my Bible. And so this should not be a shock that much of the material that we're now discovering now, outside of the Quranic material on the 19 prophets and their stories, which make no sense, we now know where those stories came from, and those stories come from the Apocrypha writings. These are the Talmudic writings. These are the Mishnah. These are the material that started to be written down in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, right up until the 6th century, were then pinched or stolen, or let's call it borrowed, just to be nice, out of those texts and introduced into the Quran sometime in the 8th and 9th century. Notice I'm saying 8th and 9th century, not 7th century. There's a reason for that. We've talked about it, and we could come back to that later on. But if you're going to pinch and borrow these stories, you're also going to pinch and borrow an awful lot of the material that Islam now calls its own. And what we're finding, and this is what the team has found out, that Mel's team from Sneakers Corner, Mel from Sneakers Corner has put together an amazing team. People like Murad, who is from the Middle East, people like Joe, who has his own channel called Red Judaism. Look at his channel, see what he's coming up with. And a new fellow that I've just met. In fact, I just met him about a week ago, and his name is Paul from London. Paul from London. Hear this character, and he is a character. He's rather interesting. I was with him all day yesterday on Zoom. We did about 4 different recordings yesterday. But this Paul fellow, about 3 years ago, was watching some of my videos on Fander Films. Got really excited with this new part material on Origins and also on the Qira'at. He was real excited to see us hold up all those Qurans back in 2016 and realize, hold on a minute, everything I'm hearing about everything I've known about the Quran is now being destroyed by these characters down right here in London, right there at Speaker's Corner. Hatun, that 5'2" lady, you've had her on your show, and Hatun has just destroyed the Quran by finding these different qira'ats, these different readings. 37 of them she has found. Now, when he saw that, he stopped teaching. He's a teacher, and he stopped all his job and decided to do research. Now, I asked him, how can you just stop what you're doing? And for 3 years, he has not worked. All he has been doing is researching all this material. He says, listen, I have lots of money in my savings. I had more in a month than I needed. And this is a chance of a lifetime to take what you were showing us and then actually do my own research on it. And that's what you're now going to see on my show, on my channel, Fander Films. I brought him up now, done 1 recording with him. I have another 4 that I'm going to be introducing probably at the end of this week. And then next week, we're doing another more. There's just so much stuff that he's come up with. He, along with Mel and Joe, the 3 of them are the ones who are really pushing what we call the Jerusalem thesis. They're finding and they're zeroing in on the Masjid al-Haram. Now, Al-Fadi, define for the people, what does Masjid al-Haram mean in Arabic?
Al-Masjid al-Haram, anytime, of course, as a Muslim, you hear it, you think of Mecca immediately. I mean, there is no escape from that. What it is, it's the area where the Kaaba is, where the first basically holy mosque in Mecca is, the area itself that encompasses the prayer area, the Kaaba, the Abrahamic station, the alleged Zamzam water, and also the Safa and Marwa. All of that is considered to be the holy place. It's almost like the place that you cannot defile, if you wish. It's almost like the Holy of Holies. Any way you look at it, it is that place where Mecca is, where the mosque, I should say, the great mosque of Mecca is, where the Kaaba is, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so it is that place that you go to. I remember you said that you used to do it for a lark. You guys would just leave in Jeddah and drive up there just for an afternoon.
Yes, so, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
where you grew up.
Yeah, I would go there sometimes by myself, sometimes with my friends. I have friends and I have family members who live there also. And I went to university at first over there for about 1.5 years. So I'm very familiar with Mecca. It's right there. And I used to think what a privileged I am, because many Muslims all over the world would love to be in my place right now to come and visit Mecca. But here I am taking a quick drive to go there and come back.
So here this Paul finds out. And he went to, chapter 2, he went to the Quran, he went to chapter 5 to chapter 8. He went to chapter 17, 22, 48, 69, and he went and unpacked everything he could find about the Masjid al-Haram. As he was reading it and looking at all the references, he said, hold on a minute, these references are not new. And he went back to the Bible, and he went back to Exodus chapter 25, and he found that almost everything that they're talking about you can find in the Bible, and it's referring to the tabernacle. The tabernacle, but where is this tabernacle? Well, he started doing some more rooting around, and he noticed that that another name for Mecca is Bakka, but in chapter 3, verse 96, and you've heard many Muslims say Bakka is Mecca, Mecca is Mecca. You can just interchange the Ba and the Ma. Well, you can't, and not necessarily, because you can see they are completely 2 different radicals. However, he says this is also in the Bible. If you want to talk about Becca, why don't you go out to the Becca that's in the Bible in Psalm 84? In Psalm 84, you will see that Becca was the resting place that the pilgrims would stay at before they went into the temple, before they went into Jerusalem to do their puja at the temple. So this is well known in Jewish circles. He talked about the shape itself and the reference, the shape. If you look at the shape of the Kaaba, it's about a cuboid shape. It's not quite square, is it? It's actually almost rectangle, the Kaaba itself.
True.
Cuboid, I guess, is the word you could use. And he said this is found in chapter 5, verse 96, and also verse 97 of the Quran. He said, if you look at that, you will see that in 1 Kings chapter 6:20, this is the exact same shape that you see of the temple that's there on the Temple Mount. Where is the Temple Mount? In Jerusalem. Look at the Temple Mount. And what's fascinating is that the station of Abraham that you just talked about, it's in chapter 2, verse 125. It's also in chapter 3, verse 97. The station of Abraham you're talking about is the exact same station of Abraham that you find in Genesis 22 and also in 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1. So these are all well known, but they're all in Jerusalem. What's more, when you go on the Hajj, the pilgrimage, you circumambulate 7 times, right?
Around everything is 7 times. 7 times around the Kaaba and 7 times between the Safa and the Marwa.
Okay, why 7? What has always been told you?
I mean, if you ask, there are so many reasons, but most of the time we're told that this is how it was originally established. And, sometimes I heard even things related. This is the number that has to do with the number of planets and other things related to that, or the pagans corrupted it and now we're restoring. I mean, there's so many reasons that you would hear about that particular number, if you wish. So in my own experience, there wasn't like a specific reason behind it.
Well, where do you think the number 7 comes from?
Well, biblically speaking, we know it's a number of completion, and there is also the 7, days of creation, and so on and so forth.
And who circumambulates 7 times? The Jews do.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you remember Jericho, right?
And in what direction do you circumambulate? Do you remember what direction you circumambulate when you're there in Mecca? Anti-clockwise or counterclockwise, as they say in American English. You're muted. I can't hear you.
It is counterclockwise. That's basically the way you do it.
That's exactly how they do it on the Temple Mount. But they've been doing this for thousands of years. The Jews have done the exact same thing in the same direction, set in the same number that is now being done in Islam, but Muslims don't understand it or know it. No Muslim can give you an answer, just like you couldn't give me an answer right now, because you're not given an answer. Gets better than that. If you remember, let me show you how this works, because it's happened in your own lifetime. When you were probably a young lad, prior to the 1980s. Now, when were you born? Maybe I'm going to embarrass you here, but were you born before 1980? Just tell me that.
Yeah. Yes, I was born before 1980.
Okay. See, I'm so old that to me seems kind of young. But okay, you were born before 1980. Before 1980, there was only one pillar that you would throw stones at, the Jamarat.
Right.
And you know this, and your parents would probably told you this.
Right.
Do you remember seeing only one pillar?
Yes, and it looks like, I mean, you can see pictures of it. It's almost like white, with a small wall around it.
A disc around it that goes into the stones.
Exactly. Yeah.
You get them, and you throw 49 stones or 72 stones, whatever the number that you choose. Now, how many Jamarats are there today?
3.
Oh, 3. So prior to 1980, there was only 1.
Right.
Now there's 3.
Right.
So what has happened about the reason for those Jamarats since they've added another 2? And what's the reason they've added another 2?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that one of the prominent reasons is that when Abraham was taking his son to sacrifice him, Satan tried to entice him throughout his 3-day journey, and each one of those represent one of those days.
Exactly. Okay. So how is it? What happened before 1980 when there was only 1? What was the story then?
Well, I mean, apparently one represented the 3 days. Now we want to. I mean, they will tell you something. They'll say the number of pilgrims is so large that doing these three, spacing them out, can help a little bit with the traffic control.
Exactly. The reason they had to add 2 more pillars was because of crowd control. There was not enough rooms, and if you're throwing stones, people were getting hit. They had to put umbrellas up. They were getting wounded, so they had to create even more. And now they don't just have it on 1 level, they have it on 3 levels. In fact, some people tell me it could be 5 levels.
That's right.
So suddenly, since the 1980s, so in the last 40 years, they've added another 2 pillars. But look what they have done. They have now added the narrative now is 3 different times that he was seduced by the devil. That's why they're throwing the stone. But that didn't exist prior to 1980. So even in your lifetime, they're changing the narrative. If they're changing the narrative in your lifetime in just 40 years, why are we surprised that these weren't changed completely in the 200 to 240 years between the time Muhammad supposedly died and when this stuff was all finally written down in the 833 and 870 and 875 and 923? Can you see? If this can happen in just 40 years in the modern age where there is technology and radio and television and everything else, and nobody seems surprised that suddenly the throwing of stones has now created a whole new narrative that all goes back to Abraham, when we know good and well that the reason there are 2 more Jumbonuts is because of crowd control, but they can't say that. They've got to put a narrative to it. Well, that's happening in our lifetime. So suddenly, if people are saying, how can this have all been created over the 240 years? It's being created in 40 years. That's one example. Now let's go to the other one that you mentioned. You mentioned Safa and Marwa 7 times. What's the purpose of Safa and Marwa?
Well, I can tell you what I was told as a Muslim. First, of course, you're told that the Safa and Marwa represents 2 people who sinned in that Al-Masjid al-Haram area. They committed adultery, and God turned them into pillars of stone, if you wish. But then the reason why you run between the 2 7 times is that when Hagar left Abraham and brought her son with her, he was thirsty and she was aching to find water for him. So she would see a mirage, and she would stand on that mountain. One of them, she'll see the mirage, run, and gets disappointed that there is nothing in there. She'll go all the way to the other mountain and turn around, and see the mirage on the other side. And she did that 7 times, and then God basically solved the problem for her with the well of Zamzam. That's the story. That's the narrative.
Running back and forth between 2 mountains, right? These are mountains.
Right. But what we saw is not a mountain. It's just few pieces of rocks.
They're only about 50 to 20 feet high, right?
Right.
They're just small rocks that kids can play on.
I mean, we played on it all the time. Right now, they surround it a little bit or protect it if you wish. But yeah, I used to.
They have glass walls around it, so kids can no longer do
that.
Exactly. Because they don't want them to fall and hurt themselves. So, what you have been told were mountains has now become mere rocks. 7 times back and forth. Right. Keeps on seeing a mirage. Now, where do you think that comes from?
In my case, before we know about these holes in the narrative, you always hear that it was something that existed since the days of Abraham, of course.
Which means Abraham and Hagar lived in Mecca.
That's correct. Exactly.
Already you can see there's a problem with this. But it gets even better, because Safa and Marwa actually did exist. Guess where they existed? And they're still there today. Guess where they are? Jerusalem.
Right.
If you look at a map of Jerusalem, look where the Temple Mount is, and look at the name that is given to the Temple Mount. Moriah. Moriah in Hebrew, when it's been transposed into Arabic, becomes Marwa. Moriah, Marwa.
Right.
Marwa is the name that Josephus used when he talks about this in the 2nd century, early 2nd century AD. But then if you go down from Marwa or Moriah, go down to the Kidron Valley in the east, you go up to another mountain across the Kidron Valley called Scopus, Mount Scopus. Scopus, according to Josephus, is known as Safa. He refers to Scopus as Safa in the 2nd century. So the Marwa and the Safa are in the writings of Josephus in the 2nd century, which are then incorporated into the tradition of Islam in the 7th or 8th or 9th century, 500 years later. But there's nothing new under the sun. This is exactly what you can still see. It's still there today. Go and see it. You can see Moriah and Scopus, which is Marwa and Safa, as it's done in the Arabic. Now, what's even more interesting is that Kidron Valley that's in between Safa and Marwa is where the apocalypse is going to happen. That's the end of times. That is where the apocalypse will take place. And that's why Jews have always gone there and run back and forth between those two mountains. How many times did they run? 7 times. Can you then understand why they're running 7 times in Mecca? It's all taken from Jerusalem. But any Muslim that tells you about this, they will say that this all took place in Mecca, and that Abraham was in Mecca, and that Hagar was looking for water in Mecca, right? A city that we don't see any reference to until the 8th century, and we don't see it on any maps until the 10th century, until 900 AD. So almost everything we're looking at, and what Mel and what Joe and what Murad and what Paul and these guys are amazing. Sarah, who's coming out of Australia, these people, they're finding all kinds of antecedents. And it's these antecedents that, to me, they are exciting. Let me give you some other ones. I mean, there's so many that are coming out every week. Every week we're coming up with new. When you shave your heads, where do you think the shaving of heads come from when you do the pilgrimage?
I mean, the Quran basically and the traditions, the Hadith, talk about those rituals. Okay. But it appears that there is a reason behind it, obviously.
The reason is this is the ritual that the Jews did before they did their pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They would do it as an honor to God. It is a Nazarite custom. Nazarite custom. It's what Samson did. Remember Samson? Then he grew his hair and let it grow and grow and grow. And then when he would shave it again, and before he went to the temple, then they would see how long the hair is. They would know how long a period that he has been to work up to his movement to the temple. This is exactly the same thing that you're continuing today.
Yes. I mean, it's always going to be part of the Hajj, which will be performed pretty soon here, by the way. So let me play the devil's advocate here.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you can address it later on, of course. But someone is going to say, okay, well, so what about the Petra narrative or theory? And also, I don't know if you've noticed, some people, and have been telling me this for a while, and one of them listed something in here that it seemed like there are some Hindu practices that Islam have borrowed from too. I don't know if you've ever looked into that, because you are connected with India, and maybe you've seen things in there that can remind you of some of these rituals as well.
Yeah, and I would not doubt that there are some Hindu practices that are very similar, or even that are like it. But the difference that we're finding now with what the Jewish or the Jerusalem thesis is that the names and the places, the names are exactly the same names. Whereas in Hinduism, the names aren't there. Now, I don't know of anybody in India, unless they could prove it to me, that would circumambulate 7 times. That I don't see. There is circumambulation in India. There's circumambulation amongst the Zoroastrians, like there's circumambulation also as far away as China. Circumambulation is quite normal for rituals, but 7 times is what I'm looking at. It's the fact that it's so specific. I don't know of anybody that's told me yet that says that has told us or our team that there are mountains called Safa and Marwa, specifically those names for the 2 mountains that you run back and forth as you go across the Kidron Valley. Or Jahannam. What is Jahannam in Arabic?
That's hell.
Hell, okay.
Yeah.
What do you think the name is in Hebrew? Gehenna.
What's that?
Gehenna.
Yeah, I mean, there is a connection to hell, or at least punishment, if you wish, in
Where do
there.
you think Gehenna is? Gehenna is also in Jerusalem. It's right off
Outside,
the Kidron Valley.
exactly. And
That's
many
where
believe
those
that Jesus was crucified in
hell.
that area. Yeah,
In the apocalypse, that's where everybody's going to go down to hell. Gehenna. Jahannam is the equivalent to Gehenna. But what's fascinating, you can the G, and as you well know, as an Arabist yourself, the G and the J can be interchanged.
right.
You say Jahannam, but those in Egypt and in Yemen say Gehenna with the G sound.
That's right. Exactly.
All right,
Exactly.
let's take that one step further. Look at the Hajj. The Hajj itself. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, now listening to this and to Mill, who came to our live stream, of course, about a month ago, it seemed like there is also a connection to Jerusalem now.
The Hajj is the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. The exact same word. There are three festivals that take place in Jerusalem that the Jews would come to, and they're called the hug this and hug that and hug the other. And that you take the G and replace it with a J, which is just a matter of putting a dot above or below the letter, and you get the same word, and you get the same idea, and you get the same place, in this case, Jerusalem. So it's because they're so specific and so similar that we're not surprised. I am willing, if any Hindus want to come up and say, I know there's one fellow that likes to keep on saying the Shiva, that these are practices of Shiva. The problem is there was no connection with India that early, and we're not even sure of the dates for those scriptures. The Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, the Upanishads are claimed to be very old, but we have no textual. No one has done textual critical analysis on them to know their exact dates. Just like we are still waiting for the Muslims to do the textual critical analysis on these books and on that book up there, the one up
I
there.
wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you.
Well, no, that's why you're doing what you're doing, and that's why we want you to get your doctorate finished, because we want to hear what you're going to find on that which you're studying, the Sanaa manuscript. So this is something that but let's get back to this Petra. What about Petra? What are we going to do with Petra? Petra would be the intermediary. Remember, in 70 A.D., Jerusalem was destroyed, right? When it was destroyed, the Jews had to leave Jerusalem. They fled. Which way did they fled? Well, they couldn't have gone west because that's the sea. They couldn't have gone north because that's where the enemies, that's where Rome was. So they had to go east. They couldn't have gone south because there was nothing there, right? We've known this this is something that you and I have been doing. We did this last month. Take a look at all the maps. Look at all the civilizations. We're kind of doing a precursor to what you're going to be introducing on your site in just a week or two, and that is, what do you see anywhere south of the Gulf of Aqaba in your country? What is there
Right now, you mean?
in ancient history? Not today. Ancient history.
Well, I mean, I believe there is the supposed location of Mount Sinai right there.
Okay, but that's Gulf of Aqaba. I'm saying south of that.
There are islands in there. There is all kind of things that you can find in the southern parts of the Gulf of Aqaba, and it connects, of course, to the Red Sea, the body of the Red Sea itself, if that's what you're referring to.
Further south of Yanbu.
You're talking cities now?
I'm talking anything.
Well, I mean, you have Jeddah, of course. There is Jeddah, south of Yambo.
And is Jeddah ancient?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it's not as old, if you wish, as might people imagine. It was built as a port city, of course, like Yambo, like Rabigh, to serve certain other inland towns,
And
like
what
Mecca
city
or
was it
Medina.
built to service? That's your city. What city was it built to service?
Mecca,
Mecca.
that's right.
What's the first reference we have for both Jeddah and Mecca, according to Dr. Gerald Hotting, who has done the germinal work on this? I don't know. Do you remember what we talked about last month?
I do remember. I can't remember the date. I mean, we know that it's later time. I mean, 8th or 9th century, I guess. Yeah,
8th
something.
century.
Yeah.
We don't have anything earlier than the 8th century. And I got burned for this. I got really burned for this because I had done a video back in February of this year where I was looking at Jeddah. People had asked me to look at Jeddah. I went up on Wikipedia like a fool that I was. And I went up to Wikipedia because I knew nothing about Jeddah. And I just saw there the reference that Jeddah has references or has historical support all the way back to the 2nd century BC. And I put that out there on my video, and boy, did I get attacked, and I legitimately so. And I realized that I had done a mistake, so I went back to look and see where the sources were for that claim, and I noticed that the two sources that gave that date were both Muslim, and they were both from the 15th century AD.
Right. And people will be watching the series that we did together on this, obviously, in Search of Mecca, I think we called it. So they are going to be exposed to that. And I think that collaborate to some extent, obviously, Patricia Crone's assertion that she couldn't find a reference to Mecca until later dates.
The first reference she found was 741, so that's mid 8th century. Nothing earlier, but she was not aware. She didn't read the whole quote. If she looked, then that's Apocalypse, Methodius, Apocalypse Methodius. That is the 741 inscription. And if she'd read the entire quote, she would have noticed that Mecca is way up close to Edessa, which is in southern Turkey, hundreds of miles away from the Mecca that we're talking about today. So it's the wrong Mecca. It's the wrong city. It's the wrong geography. But getting back to what we're talking about, everything we know about Islam, the standard Islamic narrative, posits that all the prophets, especially Abraham, lived in Mecca. Abraham had a house there, the house of Abraham, it's called. That's in Mecca. You've been there. You've seen it. He was there rebuilding the Kaaba with Ishmael in Mecca. In chapter 21 of the Quran, verse 51 to 71 is all about him being at the Kaaba and going in and destroying the idols in the Kaaba and being thrown into a fiery pit in Mecca. So right. All the narrative, the standard Islamic narrative, always has the biblical prophets down in the Hijaz. Here's the difficulty, and this is where Muslims are going to have to try to persuade and convince all of us. If they're going to go with that narrative, which is riddled right through the Islamic traditions, which is all through the Quran, they're going to have to show us any reference for the city Mecca at all. Show us one reference from before the 7th century. Remember, Abraham was living in the 19th century BC. Adam and Eve were thrown down to Mecca, according to chapter 7, verse 24 in the Quran. They were thrown down to Mecca, so it would be the earliest inhabitant of mankind. If Adam and Eve are the first man and woman, there's no one earlier. This would be the first settlement. Am I correct?
That's right. And Adam was thrown towards India, and he had to walk all the way towards Mecca to meet with his wife at the Mount of Arafat. Yeah.
The Mount of Arafat, he had to stride up. He was 90 meters tall, and he just strode right up thousands of miles from Chadman, which is in Kerala, in southern India, all the way up to Mecca. So obviously we're talking about a city that's older than any other. And we're talking about a city that's probably the most famous city in the history of mankind. Mm-hmm. We're talking about a place that should have been able to accommodate caravans. Next week, Paul and I are going to be introducing about the Hadramat, about the elephants, the hundreds of elephants that came up from the Hadramat, and they came plodding up to destroy Mecca. Ironically, if this is that important a place, if it has that much history, it would have to have all kinds of water to accommodate the fertilization, to accommodate the vegetation used for the camels and the elephants. Something as simple as elephants. Elephants are huge animals. They require lots of water. They require lots of vegetation to feed them. Show us any vegetation in that part of the world. Show us any water. Show us anything historical. Show us any reference. Outside of a few hamlets along the western plateau, which include what is today Sana and Najran and Taif and Yathrib and Khaybar and Tabuk and Gaza. Those are the major stopping places, the oasis for what we know as the Western Plateau. That's on the Western Plateau. Yathrib is part of that. These were just little hamlets. They still are there today. Yanbu, as you said, is, well, lots of history to support Yanbu, which is on the coast to support Yathrib. It was the coastal place for the people to come in from the sea up to Yathrib. But outside of those hamlets, there was no civilization there at all. None whatsoever. We can't find anything there. And in our series that you're about to bring up, that you're going to start introducing, we just shut down not only the land route going to Mecca, we're going to shut down the sea route going to your city. I feel sorry that we have to attack your own city where you grew up. All of this is coming in what you're going to be introducing.
Yeah.
But this is.
Let me clarify for everybody what Jay is talking about, and you're going to see that in a series, is that sea route is not towards the shores of the Arabian Peninsula, but rather it is closer to the African shores. And you will see that because there were more inhabitants and more commerce centers and so on and so forth. And in fact, if I remember, Jay, we talked about the fact that distance between these ports on the African side is at least a journey of 1 day for these boats. Yeah.
The water channels, by looking at the topography from space, looking down with satellite technology, we can see where the water channels are. And all of the water channels are on the African side, on the western side. There are none of them on the eastern side. None of the boats went up the eastern side. That's why there are no ports that we know of outside of the Hadramaut and Yanbu, and then this Gulf of Aqaba. We have no ports on the Arabian side for one very good reason. If you want a port, you need to have somewhere for people. You'll have to have water, and once you have water, then you can have vegetation. If there's no water, there's no vegetation, there's no port. That's why we can't find any ports on the Arabian side. They're all on the west, and they're in Eritrea. Two of them are in Eritrea. One is in the Sudan. The other two in Egypt. Exactly one boat's ride away. And these ports have historical references that go right back to the 3rd century BC. We don't find any reference at all for anything on the eastern side of the Red Sea. So we're going to shut that down in what we're going to do. We're going to show you maps. We're going to show you also timelines. We're going to show you where the cities are. We're going to show you where the trade routes went. We're going to show you where the great expeditions went. On all the expeditions trying to find a route around the Arabian Peninsula to get up to Egypt over in the in the west, to get up to Egypt in the west, coming from what is today Basra, which would be where all the Mesopotamia, coming around, getting a sea route to invade Egypt. All of these expeditions we're going to show you did not stop in Arabia. They went around Arabia because Arabia had nothing to give them. When you look at a map, any Roman map of that part of the world, it was called up here, Arabia Petraea. And then in the middle, it's called Arabia Deserta. Why do you think it's called a deserta? Because it's a desert. It was always a desert. It's still a desert. It's being vegetation. There's vegetation all over today in the 21st century because of desalinization and modernization. And as you and I talked about, the NEOM project and all these great things that Mohammed bin Salman is now building in Riyadh, which was a desert before the oil was discovered. And now that oil has been discovered, they're making it into a plantation, and they're making it into an oasis. The entire peninsula is becoming an oasis because of oil, because of the riches that have come to your country. But this did not exist prior to the 7th century. None of this existed prior to the 7th century. So when we look and we see all these traditions, when we look and see all these references to these practices, when we look and see all these theologies that are in the traditions and in the Quran, and we say these have a beginning, they must have come from somewhere, we're now finding that most of them, not all, most of them are coming from further up north, not just 600 miles up north in Petra, but 1,000 miles up north in Jerusalem. As Jerusalem was destroyed, the Jews left, as remember, and many of them went to Petra. And they took their traditions with them, and they took also their practices with them. And it looks like they influenced those in Petra between the 1st century up until the 7th century. These are known as Arabists or proto-Islamists. And they called themselves 5 different names. They gave themselves 5 different reference points. They call themselves Hagarines because they were in the line of Hagar. They believed in Abraham. That's why we call them Abraham. They call themselves also Ishmaelites because they were in the line of Ishmael, Hagar through Ishmael. They call themselves Magre because the Magre means people of Hagar. It's the people of Hagar, Magre. They also refer to themselves as Saracens. And I've just found out, Mel has just found out why they were called Saracens. Because they wanted to ally themselves with the Jews who were from Sarah. So Saracens is the root of people belonging to Sarah. Saracens. And then they call themselves Mahajirun. Mahajirun, why? Because these are people who are nomadic.
Right. Migrates, basically.
Migrating. These are the nomads. Not once did they ever call themselves Muslims. Not once.
At least at the early days. It wasn't until later that they began to call themselves Muslims.
It isn't until 692 that Muslims is finally introduced. And what does Muslim mean? Those who obey. The people who obey. So fascinating, that is introduced by Abd al-Malik. So here we go. And this is why this whole Jerusalem thesis is going to run and run and run. And we're just going to find artifact after artifact, idea after idea, belief after belief, practice after practice that has been pilfered, that has been borrowed, that has been pinched from the Jerusalem, brought down possibly to Petra. Now, here's the thing. Petra is in between Jerusalem and Mecca. But let's go back to Jerusalem with one more thing before we end on this note. Go back to Jerusalem and look and see what was built there. Because we do know that there are 3 major buildings in the 7th century that are built on the Temple Mount, on Mount Moriah, or as we now know, Marwa in Arabic. 3 different buildings. One of them you already know, and that's Abd al-Malik's Dome of the Rock. You know it because it's still there today. You go to Jerusalem, you can see it. You can't miss it. It's a beautiful building. But prior to Abd al-Malik in 692, 2 different Arabs came and actually rebuilt or destroyed what was there and built their own structures. One of them is Umar. Who is Umar? Well, you're going to find out more about that tomorrow. And we were putting up I'm putting up an interview that I had with Mel on who Umar was. Umar, who did go to Jerusalem. Umar, who did attack Sophronius. Umar, who actually conquered Jerusalem in 638. Umar, who then went immediately up to Mount Moriah and built his own structure in 638. That's the first one. Umar, who refers to himself as Muhammad.
The praised one as a title.
The praised one. His nickname was Muhammad. Remember, we said earlier that Ilyas ibn Qabisa is also known as Muhammad. But the one that Thomas the Presbyter is referring to, the one that Dr. Iacobi is referring to, the one that Sophronius is referring to, and the Chronicles of Sabaeus in the 660 is referring to, is this Umar that we're going to introduce tomorrow. Now, in 661 then, the man who then brings all these disparate tribes together under one rulership is known as Muawiyah. You know that name, Muawiyah.
Muawiyah, yes.
Muawiyah, thank you for getting it correct. Muawiyah is in 61. He then brings and solidifies himself. And what's one of the first thing he does in 661? He goes to Jerusalem, though he lives in Damascus, and he constructs another. Looks like a tabernacle. In fact, it looks just like the tabernacle that we see in the Bible. Isn't that interesting? So that's the second structure. The second, what we know as Masjid al-Haram. In every case, they call them the Masjid al-Haram. Isn't that interesting? Umar in 638 Muawiyah in 661. And then finally, you then get Abdul Malik introducing his Masjid al-Haram, known as the Dome of the Rock. What about that rock? That's a whole nother subject that we're now looking at, because that rock is still there today. And underneath that rock is an entirely vacant place. It has a chamber underneath. And did you know this?
You're talking about which structure now?
The Dome of the Rock.
Oh, yes.
You've never probably been to Jerusalem, but anybody who has or who is given a right to, you can go underneath the rock, and it has an entire chamber. And it has.
I watched just basically YouTube videos and structure, schematic designs. So that's why I knew that there is a chamber in there, and there are also double layers of walls in there, and there are some inscriptions and many other things as well.
Those are the amphitheaters that are above it, but below
Right.
where the rock is, that supposedly Abraham see that, and that is the Temple Mount, and that is where the Holy of Holies is constructed. Now there are some people who are writing and saying no, the Holy of Holies is actually outside the Eastern Wall. So you're going to get to this, but it looks like almost all the archaeology that we're getting and almost all the historical references we're getting are about that rock itself. And on top of that rock is where the Holy of Holies was for the temple, the original temple. Now that's fascinating that that's the same rock that now Islam has completely given a whole new narrative. Because remember when we talked about the Dome of the Rock in our talks, you and I, back and forth, those inner ambulatories, all the references and all the inscriptions on the inner ambulatories do not talk about why or do not talk about why Muslims believe that rock is important. When you grew up, what were you told about that rock? What were you told?
Yeah, I mean, the important thing about that rock is that during the Isra and Mi'raj, when Muhammad basically was taken from Mecca to Jerusalem, supposedly he prayed on that rock, and he led a number of prophets behind him. So that's why that rock is important. And then he ascended from there to heaven.
Up to the seven heavens.
Right.
Allah came down to the fifth heaven, met Moses, and bounced back and forth between the fifth and the seventh, getting the prayers from 50 prayers down to 5 prayers.
Speaking of Jewish influence, Moses is the one who authored the 5-day prayers.
There you go. It's Moses who says, now that's enough. Go on back down and take the 5 prayers with you. That's fascinating. Now, he comes back down. So that rock is where Muhammad went to the 7 heavens. And according to tradition, his footprint is there. Have you looked at any pictures to see of any footprints?
Of Muhammad? No. Of course, you're told that. But I can tell you one thing that I saw, the footprint of Abraham at the Abrahamic station right by that Kaaba in Mecca.
So the footprint of Abraham is there. And if
Right.
you go up to the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, in Turkey, I have been there. If you go into it, you will see the footprint in another rock of Muhammad's footprint, which is about this big. It's enormous, about twice the size of a normal human footprint. But they say this is Muhammad's footprint. You also will see a part of his beard. You also see one of his tooth. You will also see John the Baptist encased, his hand and arm encased in metal. And you will also see the staff of Moses, all
Right.
in the Topkapi Museum.
We have an ex-Muslim, a brother in the Lord, Al Mir here. He's saying in his region, which is basically Central Asia, close to Turkey, by the way, he says that in our region, it's filled with Muhammad's alleged remnants, like his hair, like his nails, his clothing, etc., etc., etc. So I don't know if, Jay, have you done any videos on this? Do you plan on doing any videos on that?
Videos on all of this, because this is all fitting the same paradigm. Islam basically created the Muslims, finally, who were introduced by Abdul Malik. Once they introduced, and once the Dome of the Rock was put there in the inscriptions, attacking Jesus, attacking his divinity, attacking the Trinity, attacking his sonship, all attacking Trinitarian, Chalcedonian, and I forgot the word right off the top of my head. Chalcedonian and the other Christians that were not the Nestorians, but the Monophysites. So those are the two primary groups that were in that part of what we know as Jerusalem today, or what was Israel at that. What is Israel today? The Monophysites The Chalcedonians were the ones that Byzantine Christianity was supporting, and that's why Abdul Malik was confronting Justinian II there in 691, 692, when he built that dome to confront that Trinitarian form of Christianity. He obviously was an Arian, and that's why this Arianist branch that he then introduces then became the dominant branch. Once they had attacked the Jesus, once they attacked Byzantine Christianity, you can see this on the coins, you can see this on the rock inscriptions, then of course they've got to then start creating and giving a text. And that's why all the manuscripts start to appear. Even the one that you're looking at, 705, 715, 719, 749, the dates are starting to come in. They're all 8th century dates. And once the manuscripts start to be formed, you've got, in order to have the manuscripts there, in order to have the qira'a, or the recitation, you've got to borrow. You've got to borrow from someone and somewhere. Where did they borrow? Now you can understand why all these borrowings were primarily from Judaism. And the ones on Jesus Christ, chapter 19, they're all from the lectionaries. That's these two books that have just come out. Not just come out. These two books looking at all the lectionaries. This book especially has been looking at all the Christian hymns. I don't know if you know Gunther Lulling, but I've been to his home. I know him. I went to see him. I helped actually get this book published in English because it was in German. He's a German scholar, Syriac scholar, and he's looked at all the Christian hymns, and he noticed that almost all the poetry in the Quran he had seen before, because he's a scholar in Syriac, and he went back to the Christian hymns and found that these are all Christian hymns from the 5th and 6th century, lifted out and then introduced into the Quran. And that's why you have so many problems in the Quran. That's why there's so many grammatical difficulties. That's why there are so many mysteries in the Quran. 20% of the Quran, the scholars don't understand. Much of it is because of the Syriac that it's lifted from. Christian Syriac, Syro-Aramaic is what they're calling it.
And here's the thing, Jay, and I say this really not to sound as if I'm enticing any anger here from people, but when you are borrowing, or in this case, possibly even stealing things from other sources and trying to cover it up, and all of a sudden the sources begins to expose you, it's a natural reaction to start to attack them, to protect yourself, to the point of using even violence to silence them.
Yeah.
Islam usually is the antagonistic force against Judaism and Christianity. And, it's the number one persecutor of both faiths, basically, throughout the last few centuries, if you wish. So there is a reason why, because it's obvious that those sources are exposing what Islam has borrowed from them. And of course, the only reaction is to try to kill them, do violence against them, to try to discredit them, and so on and so forth.
And that's why you are getting so much hate mail. I mean, here's one that you sent me that I think is interesting. Let me just read it. You sent me this. It is written earlier from a U Cartoon Junior. He says there is a channel on YouTube called Sira International. You ever heard of it?
I heard of it.
That is trying to find flaws in the Quran. Many of what they say is false and is looked into from a wrong perspective. They have many videos that are false in many ways. They have ridiculous explanations to verses from the Quran, and they cherry pick verses to make the Quran look bad. They overlook the important parts of the verse and focus on quotes to make a bad picture from it. Just wanted to spread awareness of it. My future goal, he says, is to debunk all of their videos, as all of their videos are misleading and contaminated with biased views and incorrect explanations. Now, that's just one example of hundreds that we get. You get it, I get it on Fander Films, Mel's getting it on Sneakers Corner, Joe's getting it on Red Judaism. And it doesn't surprise us, but here's what's interesting. Much of what he's saying there is about the internal critique of the Quran. Have you and I ever really critiqued the Quran internally yet?
Not really. And what's so amazing to me, and I'm going to quote Dr. Brubaker when he said one time in his show, in his own channel, he's like, somebody says we refuted you, and he says, what's there to refute? These are just images.
Yeah.
So I'm not really so sure what exactly this person is talking about, and I'm not aware of any refutations yet. We welcome somebody trying to refute what we are stating. We don't own the land. We welcome basically a dialogue. But to say you refuted images that shows real corruptions in the manuscripts of the Quran, or at least, at best, corrections and edits, let's call it this way, correcting something or editing something, how can you refute something like that? How can you and I fabricate things like this? I'm not really so sure how.
Yeah, and to be fair, if you do an internal critique, which I haven't done for a long time, it's been years since I did an internal critique of the Quran. I don't know if you've ever done it. Maybe you are. Maybe with Sam, you're doing it with Sam. But what I have noticed is when you do an internal critique of the Quran, all you're doing is reading the verse and interpreting what you read. The interpretation could be corrupted. Yeah, they won't agree with the interpretation. But what we're doing on the historical critique, this is all external. Nothing is in, we're not really unpacking the Quran. We're pretty much saying, let others unpack it. We're asking the historical question, and that is, was there any book, any mushaf called the Quran in the 7th century? A simple question. And we're looking at all the earliest manuscripts. There's one right here. This is one of the earliest ones. Here I have two more back here. Look at these huge, enormous things. This is the Michael Quran. This is the one that's in the British Library. So according to Martin Links, who was the curator for many, many years, he dated this to 790, the late 8th century. Well, Altakulich and Ekmil and Esanalu dated to the early 8th century. That's the Ma'il one. That's the one that went. Here's another one. See, all we're doing is showing the manuscripts. How can you refute this? There they are. Try to refute an image. And we're saying, look at the images. Notice they don't have dots on them. There may be, well, they have a noon that is dotted.
Yeah.
The noon is dotted on a few of them. But the vast majority, the dots aren't there. And not any vowels. No dama kasra fata. If you just look on the other side of the page, every word has dots on it and vowels. Where are they over here? So how can you say that's been refuted? If you're going to refute it, give us a manuscript. Take a look at all.
It's just an unfortunate thing, Jay. There is a level of laziness at best, and there is a level of ignorance, at worst. And here's the problem. I get Muslim friends, in my Facebook page, which I know you're not on Facebook, but they always say, you ask a question, the answer is automatically quotation from the Bible to answer my question about something from the Quran. How is that possible? If I say, sometimes you say, show us a complete 7th century Quran that matches today's 1924 copy. The answer is always, well, your Bible is not complete, and your Bible is this. I didn't ask about the Bible. I'm just simply asking you, show us any proof that there is one complete copy of a Quran that is 7th century Quran. How hard is that? If you have it, present it.
I say we never make the claims they make about the Quran. It's the Muslims and it's the Quran itself that makes the claim that it is complete. That's in chapter 10, verse 15. That's in chapter 27, chapter 27, verse 10. And then also it says that Allah even protects it from being changed. And that's in chapter 15, verse 9. And they're the ones that say it's eternal. It has never had any human intervention. It is the uncreated Quran. That's in chapter 85, verse 22. So they are the ones that are making these claims. We don't make these claims about the Bible. We would never say the Bible is eternal. We know it's written by men. Their claim is that nobody can change one word, one letter. Chapter 15, verse 9 is very clear that Allah will preserve every word in the Quran. So because we don't make the claim, why in the world are they throwing it back in our laps and saying, you do the same, prove that your Bible is not changed, one word, one letter? Well, we are very clear the Bible has been changed. We know where it has been changed because we have such a plethora, thousands upon tens of thousands of manuscripts to look at. Where are the tens of thousands of manuscripts of the Quran? Why is it they can only come up with six of them in the 8th century, 100 years after Muhammad? And even these qira'ats that we're talking about, these qira'ats, they only begin to appear in 736, and can you continue right up into 844? 844 is the 9th century. So from the 8th and 9th century, goodness sakes, can you see why? I'm sorry, 905 is the last one. So from 736 up to 905, that's the 10th century. I would like to know where the Qurans are from the 7th century. And why is it that Muslims are not able to answer this question? To suggest, therefore, that we're lying or that we're making this up when we're just showing them the dates, when we're showing them artifacts, when we're showing them the coins, when we're looking at the manuscripts, and we have them right here. These are the manuscripts that they're talking about. These are their manuscripts. These are the Quranic manuscripts.
Explain it to them, Jay, because I do have similar copies. In fact, I'm going to try to get the whole collection for my studies. But if you can explain to them what you're holding in your hand, this is are copies of manuscripts where you have the way the manuscript, the writing of the manuscript itself, the exact rasm of the manuscript, meaning the structure of the letters and so on and so forth, without dotting. And down at the bottom, they decipher it for you. They tell you this is how it reads. Now, why would they decipher it for you, Jay, if it is clear? Why would they have to rewrite it for you down at the bottom? You see my point?
It's not clear. That's the problem. This is the best one they've got. And it's probably the most complete one they have. And it's the clearest one that you can see.
But it still have 2,200 at least differences.
2,270.
Right.
2,270 difference between this manuscript and this book that we have right here, the Quran itself.
And this one, and the manuscript is a top copy, by the way, that you're holding in your hand.
This is the top copy, the best they've got. And
right.
We're finding out that this was probably written in about the mid-8th century. None of these are Uthmanic. None of these are from the 7th century. The Birmingham Folio that Muslims keep on quoting, they say, you're wrong, Mr. Smith. The Birmingham Folios are from the time of Muhammad, from 568 to 645. Muhammad was born in 570, died in 632. Therefore, it covers his life. This is the first Quran. And I'm sitting there and I'm scratching my head and says, have you even looked at it? Do you even know what you're talking about? You're talking about 2 pages of 33 verses. 33 verses from chapter 18, 19, 20. Every area, everything it talks about are pre-Islamic. They talk about the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. They talk about James the Lesser. 7 sleepers of Ephesus is from 150 AD. The James the Lesser is from the 5th century AD. And then chapter 19 is about the story of Moses, and that's from the 15th century BC. These all predate Islam by hundreds of years, thousands of years. With the story of Moses. So of course they would be in Arabic. And of course, if the carbon dates are correct, I would have no problem believing, because remember, what did we do at the very beginning of this show? What did we say? And what have we said all the way through this show? What does Islam do? It borrows, it steals, it pinches, it takes what is not theirs and claims that it is theirs, and it takes what's way up in Jerusalem, or way up in Turkey. Remember, the 7 sleepers of Ephesus is from Turkey. James the Lesser is from Palestine. Moses is from way up 1,000 miles further north. And it takes these stories, which, yes, do predate Islam by hundreds and thousands of years, and yes, they were written in Arabic, but look at the Arabic they're written in.
Right.
Nabatean Aramaic, which is from Petra in Jordan. So, of course, you're going to find stories that are pre-Islamic that I would have no doubt that possibly the carbon dates are true. But this has nothing to do with Islam. It's what Islam has stolen and put into their Quran. And if you're going to steal, if you are going to borrow, if you are going to pilfer, if you are going to pinch, you pinch that which comes before. You're just showing me examples of that which existed before Islam finally pinched it.
Exactly. And speaking of that, someone is asking about the Birmingham Folios. In my humble view, the Birmingham Folios are a classic example of what you just mentioned right now. There are four, and you can add them to other collections. You'll end up with 7 to 9, I believe, and that's it. That's about it. The dating of these, yeah, the dating of these folios predates the rise of Islam. And in some cases, predates Muhammad himself. And interestingly enough, these stories in there has to do with Moses and with Mary and Jesus. So yes, you can argue that they are the pretext for the Quran, or the sources for the Quran, or in this case, I'm going to call it the Q document for the Quran itself that existed before the Quran even was ever thought of.
This is example of the antecedents, and that's exactly what Mel and Joe and Paul and Sarah and Murad are doing. They are looking for the antecedents. Where are the antecedents to Islam? Where did Islam borrow its material from, including the Quran? And when people ballyhooed and said, we finally got the whole Quran from the time of Muhammad, they were looking at 3 stories that are only 33 verses out of 300 verses in those 3 chapters. Over 300 verses. What happened to the other 200 verses? Do you see the problem? Only 33 verses. All are stories that predate Islam. Therefore, this is an example of that which they borrowed and pilfered and pinched. Borrowed, pilfered, and pinched. That's what I'm going to call it from here on. BPP. Borrowed, pilfered, and pinched. Islam is a religion that is nothing unique. Muslims are not able to think up anything that's original. Everything they have is borrowed, pilfered, and pinched from others, and primarily from Jews and primarily from Christians. They're cousins of Abraham. They pinched from us, they pilfered from us, they borrowed from us, and then they claimed it as their own, and they put it in the wrong place. And they brought everything from up north and brought it down south. And then they thought that we would not investigate. No wonder they don't want to debate us on this. No wonder they just sit there and call us names. No wonder they tell everybody to be careful of us. And no wonder so many Muslims are now leaving Islam.
No wonder, my brother. Well, brother, thank you so much, of course, for taking time to do this. Once again, folks, myself and Dr. J, we did a number of video series. One of it is being released as we speak. In fact, tomorrow, there'll be the 3rd video of a series on MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi. We did 4 videos, so you still have 2 more, tomorrow and next week. And then we did another one on In Search of Mecca, where we also did a historical criticism of Mecca, its history, and other surrounding areas like Jeddah, for instance, and the Red Sea ports on the eastern side and the western side, the African side. And then we did another interesting series that we are going to continue to build, which is comparing 2 readings. The Hafs reading, which is the standard 1924 Cairo edition, with Warsh, which is one of many readings, if you wish. You hear about the 7 Ahruf, you hear about the 10 readings, you hear about the 14th. So we're only comparing just these two. And
right.
I think, yeah, we did at least 7, I think, and we will be adding up to 70 probably by the time we're done, if not even more.
Yeah, there's over 5,000 that we could do. I've chosen 43 that are the choicest best of the 5,000 that exist. Right. We're going to do them one at a time, 1 verse at a time. And they're going to start going up there on Sita International. Then I'll bring them over to Fander Films so that you can see. Because if I say, and if I look at them and try to show you the difference in the Arabic, I'll look a fool, because I'm not an Arabist. I can read and write it, but I do not understand it. Nothing like Al-Fadi. Al-Fadi is an Arabist. It's his mother tongue. He understands the grammar. He's doing his doctorate in this very language. So who better but Al-Fadi? So when Al-Fadi speaks, you have to listen. And that's why it's going to be so much fun. When are you going to start putting those up? We've already done 7. We're going to be putting more every time we get together.
Pretty soon we will be putting those, and hopefully by the time we meet again in a few months, we will add much more to that collection. But all that to say, folks, is this. Regardless of whether we're talking about the Jerusalem basically narrative or thesis, and the Petra thesis and any of the other discoveries, one thing is very clear. Something is cooking up north, and it has nothing to do with the traditional location of Mecca. It's not a coincidence that you find similar things up north, whether in Petra or Jerusalem. It's not a coincidence that you have Safa and Marwa there. It's not a coincidence that there is the idea of a pilgrimage. It's not a coincidence that there is a pillars basically representing something, similar to what we find in Mecca. It's not a coincidence that we have evidence of another Kaaba that existed in those locations. So all of this, not to mention the Qibla, of course, direction, that's the most damaging in my view. All of that leads us to conclude the following. Mecca was not even thought of in the 7th century, not even by any stretch of an imagination. Was it thought of later? Sure, I'll give you that. But it has nothing whatsoever to do with a religion that was established in the 7th century, nor with a book that's supposedly written in the 7th century, or a man that allegedly emerged in the 7th century. So indeed, as my brother would say, the book and the man are in trouble because they cannot defend their traditional narrative. And that's why we call it holes. Absolutely. Brother, what else are you working on? And you said something about tomorrow. You're having some interviews?
Tomorrow we're going to continue with the Jerusalem thesis. And then tomorrow I'm going to be putting up who exactly is Umar and why is he significant. And that's going to... We're going to say that we made a mistake with Ilyas ibn Qabisa. But this is interesting. When we find that we have got the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time, we admit it. We're the first to admit it. And we're going to do that tomorrow. We're going to say, listen, we thought it was Ilyas ibn Qabisa, but he does not figure into what Theodosius is saying or what Sophronius is saying, and also what the Sabaeus is saying. They are actually talking about someone different than Ilyas Qabisa. So who is the person that's different? We're going to introduce him tomorrow.
Amen. And one last thing, of course, archaeology does not support anything around Mecca. Why in the world would you find the nails of the Prophet and pieces of his hair in Turkey, not around Mecca? I mean, something just to think about. Simple stuff like this, just think about it. Take a moment and just think, why would you find it way north and you won't find a single evidence down south around his alleged area where he was born, raised, or lived? And there was a lot of this, construction that took place just in the last couple of years, by the way. Not a single artifact ever been discovered because it would have made the news.
Yes, they did. They discovered one thing, a Ottoman fort from 1299.
There you go.
And only thing they discovered after digging all those huge...
And that's what I mean, artifacts at the time of Muhammad, 7th century, basically.
Ruins of one Ottoman fort from 1299.
So 1299 versus when Muhammad allegedly came into the scene in 570, received his message in 610, died in 632. Nothing whatsoever.
It's the only city in the world where there are no artifacts to support any of their history.
It's a miracle, man. That is a miracle in and of itself, actually. Yeah. So, well, brother, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And we will continue to do these series tomorrow. Myself, I'll be hosting Dr. Tony Costa for at least 25 minutes. Then we're going to jump into his channel because he's launching his own show now. And hopefully those who will join me will jump with me to his channel as well. He will be interviewing me. And I will have Anthony Rogers this week, Sam Shamoun also tomorrow late night. And after that, I'm taking a vacation. I'm literally taking a vacation for 2 weeks because I am exhausted and I need some time off to refuel. And we'll come back hitting the ground running again. Brother, last words.
No, you've said it all. And I think this is what is fun coming and having this time with you. It's this material that we are unpacking that nobody can really refute because it's all based on places, named events, peoples, and time. And that's why it's so important that we do this with not just Islam, we do this with every religion. It has already been done with the Bible. The Bible has gone through every historical test. We have done redacted criticism on the Bible. We've done source criticism on the Bible. We've done a textual analysis on the Bible. We've done and asked the questions of Jesus Christ. And in every case, the Bible fulfills every criticism. Now we're asking the same questions that were done against Jesus Christ and our scriptures. We're asking about Muhammad and his Quran. And the same questions that were asked about Jerusalem and Bethlehem and the places that Jesus went to and spoke at, we're asking of Mecca. And what we're finding is we can't find a thing about any book, any man, any place in the Hijaz, unlike what we can find about our book, our man, and our place. Come on home. Come on home to the bigger book, the bigger man, and the bigger place.
Amen. I forgot to mention to you guys that I'll have Adam Seeker also on Friday. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. God bless you. Take care. This is Al Fadi.